Well, good morning everyone, and as you perhaps know, March the 2nd is the feast day of St. Chad. St. Chad is not a very well known saint, but he's very important to us here living in the Midlands because he spent the last part of his life here in this part of England, and he is the patron saint of this Archdiocese of Birmingham in which we live. Patron saints are very important because they are people who will be interested in us, who will take an interest in what we do, and they're people to whom we can turn to pray in whatever needs we have. And this Archdiocese of Birmingham has many needs. It's very short of priests. It's getting a bit short of people. Parishes are closing down. We're running out of money. We're in a terrible state, really. And so we need the help of all the saints we can pray to help us. And one of the most important will be St. Chad. He wasn't born in this part of the country. He was born in the northeast of England, somewhere perhaps round about Durham or Newcastle, in that kind of area. And he was one of 4 brothers, and all of them became priests, all 4 of them. He decided he wanted to be a monk, and so he lived in a beautiful island called Lindisfarne off the northeast coast of England under a very great English saint called St. Aidan. It was at some stage then that the bishop who was going to become the Archbishop of York went abroad so that he could be consecrated to be Archbishop of York, and this was a very important post in the church in England in those days. And this man who was sent away was one called Wilfrid, and he was a very important saint. But Wilfrid was away so long that people got a bit worried and a bit anxious, so they said, we better have a bishop in York because it's such an important place, and they chose St. Chad. Well, Chad took over the city and the Diocese of York, but Wilfrid came back. And Wilfrid said, well, look, I'm supposed to be the Archbishop of York. Well, Chad was a very nice, quiet, humble man, and he said, you're very welcome to it. And so he retired, and Wilfrid took over as Archbishop of York. However, they saw what a good person Chad was. They'd seen how conscientious he was, they'd seen how holy he was, and how concerned he was for the people with whom he lived. And so when they decided they wanted to set up a new diocese, a new religious area in the Midlands, this part of the world, they chose St. Chad for that. And so he became the first bishop of Mercia, Mercia being the central part of this country, and he decided he was going to have his main place in Lichfield. Now, Lichfield is a city just about 25 miles north of Birmingham. And St. Chad had a little cathedral there, and he only was bishop for 3 years, and then he died at a very early age. But in those 3 years he worked very, very hard. He wanted to walk everywhere, he wanted to go around on foot, but that clearly wasn't very efficient because it took him a long time. And so they said, you must have a horse. And he said he didn't want a horse. But the Archbishop of York, Wilfrid, came down and apparently picked him up and put him on the horse and told him he was to go around his diocese visiting the people on the horse. Chad, good and holy that he was obedient and went around on his horse. Anyway, there was a plague, rather like we're having the pandemic at the moment, and in the year 672, at the age of only 34 years of age, St. Chad died. Well, people recognized that he'd been a very holy man, and they said he must have been a saint. And so they began to pray to St. Chad, even within weeks, months, years of his dying. And they decided they wanted to build a shrine in his honor so that people could go and visit him and pray to him. And this shrine was set up outside the little church that he'd had in Lichfield. Eventually a new cathedral was built there, and it's a lovely place to visit. And they have 3 spires, and from miles around in any direction you can see these 3 spires of Lichfield Cathedral. And a shrine of St Chad's was built in Lichfield Cathedral, but the story doesn't end then, because during the Reformation, when the Catholic Church came under persecution, the bones of St Chad, the relics of St Chad which had been buried in Lichfield, were stolen. But they came into the hands of a very holy English Catholic priest, and he kept them safe, and he gave them to distinguished Catholic families who kept them safe. And in 1841, when it was permissible to build Catholic churches again in a public place, a new cathedral was built, not in Lichfield but in Birmingham, and it was dedicated to St Chad, and these relics were given to St Chad's Cathedral and are placed in a beautiful gold-plated box, which is now put over the high altar at St Chad's Cathedral in Birmingham. And when you get a chance to visit it, as I'm sure you all will at some stage, you'll be able to look straight ahead of you when you go in to see this beautiful golden box, and inside are the relics of St Chad. And there used to be a procession in Birmingham on St Chad's Day, or on the Saturday near St Chad's Day, when these relics were taken out of that box and were processed round the streets. And I myself have walked in that procession and was very pleased and very proud to do so. The people in Birmingham used to have an old rhyme: St Chad, be our patron still, and help our mothers with their shopping up Snow Hill. Snow Hill in Birmingham being the place very near where St Chad's Cathedral is. When you go into St Chad's Cathedral, on the right-hand side there's a statue of St Chad, and he's holding a book of the Gospels to show that he was a teacher. He's holding a crozier, that's the staff that a bishop holds, rather like St Ambrose has got, and to show that he was a bishop. But in his other hand he's got a model, a statue of the cathedral in Lichfield. He does look as though he's having rather a job to keep them all together and not drop one of them. But it's a very good statue, a very nice statue, and it's one that reminds us that St Chad is our patron. So those people who are in St Chad's house in Kidderminster are very lucky, because they've got a wonderful saint as their patron. And I hope that on March the 2nd every year you'll have a little word with St Chad and ask him to help all of us here in this Archdiocese of Birmingham to be as faithful and good as he was. God bless you.